Could you retire today? Let's ask the 4% rule. How are you guys doing today? My name is Apple, and today we are filling in the financial gap between schools and the real world. And today we're talking about the 4% rule. And in this video, we're going to cover what the 4% rule is, why it works, and any potential risks or limitations there are when you're using the 4% rule in your own life. And be sure to share this video with a friend before we hop right in so they can see how to achieve early retirement. Okay, so 4% rule, what is it? 4% rule is essentially, all it is the rate of withdrawal that you can afford to do to achieve retirement. So what this means is how much of your money you can actually afford to take out of your retirement savings to actually live on and not deplete your retirement savings before you die, essentially. Now, I know it's a little bleak, but you definitely don't want to run out of money in retirement when you're at this life stage when you are no longer able to work to sustain yourself, or you no longer want to work to sustain your quality of life. You want to be able to just live off of the money that you have built up over the course of your life and not have to worry about going out and getting an income if that is something that is even possible for you at this life stage. So essentially, it's how much you can withdraw from your account so that you don't run out of money. And what this rule assumes is it assumes a 30-year retirement. So it assumes that you retire, you live for 30 more years, and then you die. So if you are thinking about an early retirement, I have some adaptations to this rule that we can use in a little bit. But yeah, just know that this is going to be applicable to any type of retirement, but the 4% rule is aimed at your 30-year standard retirement. Okay, so your 4%. This is assuming that you are invested. Your money is invested, which it definitely should be. It should not just always be sitting in a bank account losing value to inflation, because if that was the case, then you're definitely not going to be able to sustain yourself on your money in your bank account. So this 4% rule assumes that you are invested in a mix of stocks and bonds at the very least. You got to have at least an asset allocation, like we talked about in our A to Z video, of stocks and bonds, but ideally you've got more things in there. You've got real estate, maybe a business, to ensure that all of your eggs are not in one basket, especially they're not all sitting in the bank losing you money over time. So your 4% consists of any money that you withdraw from your investments and any dividends or interest payments that you're paid. So say your money is split between stocks and bonds, and your stocks pay you 2% in dividends. Your bonds pay you 2% in interest. Then there's your 4% right there, and you don't even have to sell anything. That is your 4% that you're going to be able to live off of as you are retired. However, if your stocks only pay you, say, 1%, your bonds pay you 1%, then you're going to have to sell off some of these investments each month to maintain your 4% rule. So just a quick example. Say you wanted to live on $40,000 throughout your retirement. Say that was your goal. You're like, all right, I can live on 40 grand a year in retirement. That is something that is possible for me. So how much money are you going to need in your investments right now to make that a possibility? Let's do the math. So you've got 1 million times 4% equals $40,000. So you're going to need $1 million invested today to be able to retire and live off that $40,000 for at least the next 30 years. So say you are in a stage where you're like, all right, I'm probably only gonna live another 30 years. Probably not the most happy thought, but if that's the case and you want to live off 40 grand, then you're gonna need $1 million to ensure that that money is around until you retire. So historically, this rule has worked over any span of time, and your money has never been depleted before 33 years. So you look at any stretch of time, you look at the Great Depression, the Great Recession, any of these times when you are retiring, the 4% rule always sticks up, and you always had enough money to sustain yourself for at least 33 years. So this rule has been time tested, and it has been proven time and time again to be effective. However, this is only a rule of thumb. This is not something that should be taken as a hard and fast rule for how to retire. This is not your full financial retirement plan by any stretch of the imagination. This is just a starting point for you to think, okay, and just get a number in your head and think, okay, so I want to live in my retirement, I want to live off of $80,000. I want to be able to spend $80,000 a year, go out to all the nice restaurants, get a real nice house, just live it up while I'm retired. So you want to have $80,000. Well, what you're going to need in your savings account and your investments is actually $2 million to make that a reality. So keeping that in mind, it's going to be a good way for you to sort of figure out how to get on track to that retirement that you're envisioning for yourself, and it's going to give you a number to aim at over time, so that you have like that vision in your head of, okay, I need to achieve $2 million. How am I going to do that before I want to retire? So it's good. It's a good thing for me personally to do. I like to have that goal. I like to have that number that's like, all right, at that point I will have enough to sustain myself. So that is a good thing to be able to have, just that goal to aim at. All right, so now why does it work? Why does the 4% rule actually work? Well, historically, actually, until about mid-1990s, it was actually the 5% rule. And people thought that they could take out 5% and sustain a 30-year retirement. Now, this was the case for some people. However, with some economic hardships, we got the Great Recession, we've got the dot-com bubble burst. These things heavily affected our retirement, and because of these events, we realized that it was more like a 4% rule that would allow us to maintain that 30-year retirement and be completely safe in that. With the 5% rule, you're going to run out of money a couple times out of 100. It still holds up pretty well, but with the 4% rule, again, historically, it has held up for at least 33 years in any stretch of time. But the 4% rule is just a more conservative estimate. And it is a pretty conservative estimate, in my opinion, just because, let's look at the numbers really quick and see why that is. So on average, stocks tend to return about 10% each year. That is the historical return from stocks. We've got our 10%. And bonds tend to return about 5%. So we've got 5% from bonds, okay? 5% from bonds, 10% from stocks. We add that up. And say at retirement we had a portfolio that was 50-50 stocks and bonds. Our average return from that over each year would be 7.5%, 7.5%. Now the Fed's target for inflation is 2%. So the Fed is going to work to keep inflation at 2%, which means you are going to lose 2% of your purchasing power every single year. So if we go ahead and we subtract 2% from our 7.5% that we're going to gain, we're going to lose 2% to inflation, and that's going to net us a total of 5.5%. So based on averages, we would be able to make this into a 5.5% rule and be able to have a safe retirement if we took out 5.5% of our investment. However, these are averages we're working with, so that means that on average the 5.5% rule would work. However, that is going to put us at a bit of a risk, because averages, that's going to be in the middle, so half the time it's not going to be enough, half the time it's going to be enough. So we really don't want to put yourself in that position. That is why we take the 4% rule, because it's a lot more of a conservative estimate that allows us to ensure that we're going to have money for at least 33 years, whereas with the 5.5% rule, we'd be running out of money 50% of the time before actually 30 years came up. Now, ideally, what's really cool about the 4% rule is you never even have to touch your principal. So like we said here, your investments should be growing 5.5% per year. So by only taking out 4%, you should actually not be reducing the amount of money that is left in your investments. So with that 1 million, if you take out 40,000 every year and your investment is growing by 55,000 every single year, then your money is actually growing while you retire. So you're going to be able to leave this very nice nest egg for your future generations, which is really, really cool. You're able to sustain yourself on a decent living while still building your investment and leaving behind a hefty chunk of change for your future generations, which is really, really cool. And that's why I really, really like the 4% rule, because it allows you to live off of the money that you've already invested and not have to touch that money and ensure that it is passed down generation to generation. But that's probably not going to be the case that your money is completely untouched by the time you retire, by the time you pass on that money to the next generation, because the stock market does not always go up at 10% and the bonds do not always increase at 5%. There are definitely huge fluctuations that will take place that will allow your the value of your investments to lose value over time and will reduce the purchasing power that you actually have, which we're going to talk about in the next section with limitations and the risks associated with the 4% rule. But again, I'm just going to restate, this is based on a 30-year retirement horizon, and any longer of a retirement horizon, say you want to retire and retire for 40 years, then this number is going to have to be smaller because you are going to want to ensure that you do not run out of money before you actually die, because that would be a pretty bad spot to put yourself in. So again, if you want to have a longer retirement, you're going to have to make this number smaller, and you're going to have to acquire more assets before you actually go out and retire. All right, so now let's talk about the limitations and the risks of the 4% rule. So the limitations are really twofold. It depends on the market and it depends on the individual. So depending on the individual, what does that mean? Why does the 4% rule depend on the individual? Well, it depends on the individual because it depends on your medical bills. It depends on how long you live. It depends on if you want to leave a nest egg. It depends on the future of Social Security. So there are all of these things that depend on you as an individual that could jeopardize your 4% rule and jeopardize you having enough money to retire. So say you retire, but you have these crazy medical bills. You have to do all these really big procedures. You got to get a new hip. You got to get a new liver. I don't know. You got to get a new hip. Your lungs aren't doing too good. And you have to have all of these procedures done that could really eat in to that potential 4% that you're going to have. And that could reduce this to say like a 3% or lower. So it really does depend on you. Also depends on how long you live. Obviously, if you're living longer than 30 years after you retire, you could be at risk of running out of money. And depending on how Social Security does over the next 30, 40 years, who knows if it's even going to be around. But that could definitely have a huge influence on whether or not this 4% will be able to sustain you as well. So how does this depend on the market? Well, it depends on the market because a severe correction in the market at the beginning of your retirement could heavily impact your percentage that you can afford to live off of. So say you're invested in 50-50 stocks and bonds. Stock market crashes by like 50%. That's going to reduce the amount of money that you have in your account by a full 25%, which could potentially put this 4% number down to a 3% number, and drastically throw off any estimates you had of the money that you'd be able to live off of, the expenses that you'd be able to afford in your retirement stages. So historically, somebody has royally screwed up every 30 years. So first off, we had the Great Depression in around 1929, 1930. Next, about 1970, late 60s, we had that correction there. In the early 2000s, we had that market correction there. So every about 30 years, somebody screws up royally, and stock prices, bond prices, asset prices are going to fall massively. So we know that historically, so you have to be accounting for that in your estimates, which is why that could drastically impact your number if this happens at the beginning of your retirement and really reduces your total investment in general. Okay, also, if you're invested in things that are more risky than just your general run-of-the-mill bonds and index funds, then this could drastically impact your 4% number as well. So if instead of a 50-50 split between like index funds and bonds, you put all of your money into like penny stocks and those just like crashed, then you're really SOL, and your 4% could be down to like 1% or like 0.5%. So this is assuming that you are investing in conservative investments as you are older, which you really should be, and assuming that you have like half your money in index funds, half your money in bonds or bond funds, because that's going to allow you to maintain your wealth and not risk any huge spikes, either upwards or downwards, that could affect how much money you're actually going to have in your retirement stages. And going along with this, you also really got to remember taxes. So taxes can really eat into your retirement if you're not accounting for those. So some of the big taxes, I mean, your capital gains tax. We talked about this in our capital gains video in our A to Z financial literacy, but capital gains tax. So where are you withdrawing your money from? Are you taking it from an IRA? Are you taking it from a Roth IRA? There's going to be a significant difference in the amount of tax you pay depending on which kind of account you're taking from. Are you withdrawing from a 401k? That's going to definitely have some serious taxes right there. However, a Roth IRA is going to have some of the least tax that you're going to have to pay when you're realizing your capital gains. So you have to take taxes into account because those can significantly eat into your money. And if you're not accounting for those, a 25% tax can reduce this 4% number down to a 3% number and reduce your $40,000 a year down to a $30,000 a year, which could be very, very significant in your retirement. Also, I just want to say that you should keep interest rates in mind when you're looking at your retirement horizon. Is the Fed currently raising interest rates? Are they currently lowering interest rates? And what does the future of interest rates look like? Because that can have a serious impact, especially on bond prices, but also on stock prices, because interest rates are very, very crucial to how the markets are going to function. So you got to keep those in mind as well, just to realize the overall market conditions that you are retiring in. So lastly, just remember that this is going to be a rough guideline. This is not your retirement plan. 4% rule is not your full financial retirement plan by any stretch of the imagination. Definitely not. No, no, no. But it is a good guideline for you to look and get like a goal number in mind, or just get an idea of what it's going to take for you to be able to retire at the level that you wish to do so at, and to have the money that you wish at that stage in your life. So that about wraps it up for the video, guys. If you did enjoy, please do leave a like, subscribe, share this video with a friend, all that good stuff. Check out my website, applecreator.com. Just released it, just went live. Be sure to check that out. I will see you tomorrow, and until next time,